facilitated a session yesterday about how should we go about developing this framework and breaking it down and getting it into people's psyche so we can use it as a tool. So Sam, over to you, and hope we can get a lot out of this next session with you.
Thank you. Morning, everybody. It's always difficult when you stand up here in front of your peers, because they're the most difficult audience to please, and I accept that. So I don't want to talk at you for an hour. If anybody's got anything you want to say, you want to shout up, you want to ask a question, please do so. All right, this is not, and I think the term is an information dump, this is not that. I quite like the concept of a coaching conversation. This whole idea that we can share some thinking, okay, and I think my title, Talent Thinking, suggests just that. All right, so I'm not standing here saying that I know it all, not at all. I know very little. In fact, I don't consider myself to be an intelligent person as such. I'm somebody that likes a subject, and I try hard to contribute to that subject, and I think you all do exactly the same, okay? Now, on your agenda, you will see that there are three of us. So myself, Sergio, and Manuel. I'm led to believe Sergio is sunning it in Athens, and Manuel is in Spain, and I'm here in Manchester. Now, I'd actually much rather be here, and I mean that, yeah, I'm very lucky to be here, okay? So the things that I'm going to talk about are not from me. All right, there's a group of us that spend a lot of time working together, trying to put together something that we felt reflected what all of us wanted to do. And when I say all of us, I'm talking about the collective in this room and other coaches, okay? So please don't leave here saying, Sam says, or yeah, he doesn't know anything, because I'm not suggesting I do. I'm trying to offer some prompts, some cues, some ideas that we can go away with and explore, okay? The second thing I want to do, so when Charlie said, can you do a session, I wanted to think about what it was that would be valuable to you. Because the reality is, we're all practicing coaches. We want to be on the floor, we want to be working with young people, okay? So I wanted to do something that was maybe informative, that would get across some key messages from the program, but also was an opportunity for you to say, yeah, I don't like that, Sam. Why are we doing that? Can we not change it? Okay, so we're going to have a look at the rationale very quickly, and I genuinely mean quickly. Okay, so we'll have a look at the rationale behind the program. So essentially what you will do this Sunday on the floor, we'll have a quick look at why we're doing it. Okay, I put theory into practice, and you know, I'm sure there's lots of intelligent people in the room. You know that there's a big gap between the two. All right, we've tried to bridge that gap a little bit. So we'll have a look at that. The pillars of development, we'll very quickly say, you know, remind ourselves what they look like. But what I really want to get into is questioning. Okay, so I guess I'm going to challenge you a little bit to think about your practice, what it is that you do on the floor. All right, and then obviously give you an opportunity to ask me questions. And not just questions from today. You might want to talk about the program. You might want to talk about the session plan. All right, you might not like it, you might think it's rubbish, you might think there's a different way of doing it, and I'm happy to listen to that. Okay, so depending on where we are with time, you know, we'll see if we can get into that a little bit. Okay, so where did we start from? I sat, well, myself, Sergio, and Manuel sat with Charlie, and we spoke for probably a good 3-4 hours, and we debated this whole idea of talent. And I'm sure if I asked you now to define talent, there'd be lots of different ideas, different concepts. We'd think of different ways of describing what it looked like. But ultimately, we tried to get to a point where we talked about basketball talent, because that's what we're really interested in. Okay, how do we develop basketball talent? Okay, and I'm sure you've all heard of the term, the basketball development model, so this consultative process. That's where we started. Okay, so I'm not going to bore you with that. During our initial conversations, we talked about a model, so modeling this talent process. What was it going to look like? How would it facilitate basketball? How would it enable all of you, me, the rest of us, to deliver a development program? We got stuck on prescriptive and descriptive. All right, and we spent a little bit of time talking about that. So would our model, would the PDF, which I think originally was called the ADF, all right? Yeah, so it was the Athlete Development Framework to begin with, okay? Would it be a prescriptive model? Would it tell you exactly what you needed to do, when you needed to do it, and how you needed to do it? Now that is an absolutely ludicrous concept, because talent is not linear. The development of talent is not linear. So I guarantee you now, all of those out there, that was nicely timed by the way, I told them to run by at that moment. All of those out there are learning at a different rate, a different pace, okay? They have different experiences, different backgrounds. So it cannot be linear, all right? So we have to think of it very differently. So we then got on to descriptive. So are we suggesting that our model will offer some ideas, some values, some beliefs, some ways of doing it? And actually, and I think it was Sergio that said it best, actually our model is both prescriptive and descriptive. Now at the minute, it's this big chunky document that if any of you read it cover to cover, I applaud you, all right? Because it doesn't necessarily happen. You might pull little bits of it out, you might read a couple of pages, you might try to skim read it. A bit like the areas of emphasis. Fantastic document. Who read 130, is it 132 pages? Something like that, 140, oh, you've read it cover to cover. Well done. All right, but not many of us do. So we wanted something that was both prescriptive and descriptive, that was digestible, because that's the important bit, and that we could bring to life, okay? We use the word dynamic. We think that the PDF is dynamic, it's fluid, it's a learning model. So we'll get to the end of the first cycle, we'll review it, we'll evaluate what we're doing, and that relies on you guys feeding in, and then we'll shift. So if it's not quite working, we'll move it around a little bit. You know, we'll take on board some of the ideas from the people that are working on the floor, and we'll make it look different. So it has to be dynamic. And club driven, and I know that Stuart alluded to the value of the clubs earlier, and I think that, you know, I would argue that all of you are working in clubs, so that's an element of club driven, but it has to be about the clubs. So that was our thinking, and we spent 3-4 hours, then we went away and spent a long time discussing from different virtual platforms. I spent a lot of time researching, looking at different models, different sports, what the literature told us about talent ID, and we got to a certain point. And I used the term research informed and research led. So what I'm hoping is that throughout the first cycle we are learning as we are doing. All right? And that's my research led approach. The informed bit was obviously the work that myself, Sergio and Manuel did. Okay, so that's your model. And I think it's quite right to call it your model. That's what we have. Now, if there's an element of that that you think doesn't work, you'd like to see come to life a little bit more, then I'm certainly open to any conversation, but I'm sure Charlie's exactly the same. Okay, I perhaps should have not listed those and asked you to tell me what they were. I actually would be if I was at work now, I would be teaching the fundamentals of teaching and coaching, but I don't want to treat you like those students, because I think you have far more to offer, so that's why I've just put them straight up. They're not anything groundbreaking, and I think, if I'm right, through the BDM, they spent a long time coming up with these labels, and then we shaped and polished them a little bit, and that was the end result. What's important about them, and I'm not going to talk to you about them in any great detail, but what's important about them is 3 of them are underpinned by what we call psychological characteristics. And I think as we go through my next 20 minutes, whatever I've got left, you'll see why that's important. Okay? So basketball committed, again, I don't need to tell you what that means, but that has a psychological element to it, skilled technician and persistent performer. Not many governing bodies do that. So lots of the talent plans that I looked at were very much tech, tac and physical. So we believe if I can get them to to develop the skill, play the game and be physically strong in doing so, then I've created a talented player. What's missing from all of that is the mental resilience. So if they can't deal with the pressures, and these pressures are not just game pressures, there are pressures in every element of talent, pressures that perhaps some of us don't even know about. So do you know what the circumstances of all your players are when they leave your care, when they go home, when they're in their clubs, when they're in school? Do we know what those pressures are? And we have to try and some way consider those within our practice. And our behavior, and if any, you know, I know I spoke to a few of you about it, my research is all about coaching behaviors. So our behaviors drives a lot of what happens to these young people. Okay? So our pillars, I would argue, although in terms of their focus are not groundbreaking, actually we've done a lot to make sure that what we are creating are solid, holistic athletes. Okay, so again, I promise this is not a fundamentals of teaching and coaching lecture. This is a coaching conversation, so I'm not going to spend too much time on this. But in terms of the session plan and the sessions that you deliver, this is now the focus. So I've given you the background, the rationale, where we're at. Anybody got any questions to this point? No, you're just all going to leave me hanging, and I'm going to do all the talking. Yes, sir.
How are you capturing the resilience for the kids that are coming through? That last slide.
Okay, so there's no testing at the minute, so we're not doing any of that. But what we are doing in the session plan, and you'll see this in the game-based stuff, there is a lot around autonomy and confidence. Okay, and they're cognitive processes. So what we're trying to get to is a shared environment. We want athletes to actually contribute back, and all of that is all about the psychology and trying to get them to be stronger, make decisions, be problem solvers. Okay, and then I'm sure at some point we'll start to look at how we test and how we can develop that further.
So in the East Mids on Sunday, we're planning on taking some of a random group of players to the side and filming them and asking them questions, not direct questions, but sort of like hidden questions to say, how is it for you? What's happening?
Okay, well, hold on to that for, because that's what I want to get to is the questioning. All right, and then if I haven't answered it after that, ask me again. Okay, so quick look at a game-based approach, and again, you'll all have different ideas about what that looks like. Is it game sense? Is it teaching games for understanding? Is it the sport model? Okay. I'm just generally talking about some of the modifications, the exaggerations that we employ in order to create learning environments. Empowerment, if any of you have listened to Alan's podcast, talks a great deal about empowerment. I'm pretty sure the majority of you have some thoughts and ideas about it. I will try and pull it out in terms of what it looks like for Aspire. And then the bit that I really want to get to is models of questioning. So how we shape our questions. So, athlete-centered, pretty contested term, and in actual fact, I spoke to one of the regional talent managers about it last night. So, in the literature, lots of people use the term, we are athlete-centered, student-centered, it's all about the young person, we put the young person first. What does it actually mean? I would argue, and the literature is beginning to argue, that the term perhaps should be coach-athlete-centered. Because it is a relationship. Coaching is a relationship, a social process. All right? So is it that it's coach-athlete centered, or as the regional talent manager I spoke to last night indicated, could we actually have needs centered? So our coaching is about meeting needs. And I quite like that. I think that fits pretty well. But however you use that term, what we are saying is there is a shift in the power. Okay? So it's not about the coach. It's not about this group of empty vessels that I turn up and fill. All right? And we have to get away from, and I'm pretty sure that all of you already are well away from that, but we have to move from that. Okay? Because that's not coaching, it's not teaching. Okay? Through a game-based approach, we start to elaborate on, we start to identify the true nature of the relationship. So I would argue that it's very interpersonal. The more effective coach you are, and again, if anybody's had a conversation with me before, I like effective over good, because I'm not quite sure I understand what a good coach is. But I'm pretty clear on what an effective coach is, and there's a big difference. Okay? So within that effective practice, there has to be a level of interpersonal in terms of the relationship, the interaction, okay, and the weight of power. So we can't have it at one end. I've already said coaching is a social process. I think through a games-based approach we can stimulate thinking. I like the term independent thinking athlete. I'd like to say I created it and I own it, but I think it was one of my lectures many years ago that came up with the phrase. And I think a lot of you talk about similar sort of scenarios. I know Alan talks about it, and I'm pretty sure you'd be able to tell me what the phrase is, Mac, for it. But he has some concept of what he wants an athlete to be.
A lot of concepts.
But it's the one that he talks about that basically empowers the athlete is a thinker.
Yeah,
but he talks more. It's not just the individual; it's within the team as well, and how the teammates support and development, and how they do it as well. It's not all on the athlete. It's how it's coach athlete centre, but it's also athlete centre as well. You know?
Okay, interesting. But I think certainly in our sport, so and in any invasion sport, if you don't have thinkers, if you've only got people that are listening and responding to instruction, I'm not quite sure how successful we can be. Okay? Game-based approach is very much about developing strategic thinking. So again, this whole concept of the athletes making decisions in the moment. Okay? So they see what's in front of them, they decide what it is that they have to do, how they're going to do it, and why. And the why is the important bit. Okay? So again, think of our PDF and the moments of the game. So in any one single moment, what principles do I apply in order to be successful? That's how we should see coaching. Not, I'll wait, listen, tell me, see what the coach tells me to do, and then try and do it. Because it doesn't actually work. My research, I spent 2 years in the regional development tournaments, interviewing the coaches and the players. And if I tell you that some of the responses in the focus groups of the players was quite simply, I don't hear my coach. Now you could argue that's based on the level you coach at. So if you are in, I don't know, if you're coaching conference in the north of the country, you might have 10 people watching the game. So noise isn't necessarily an issue. But generally speaking, they don't hear their coach. It could be the distance that they are from the coach. It could be the level of interaction within the game. But they don't hear their coach. Those that do hear their coach, and this may surprise you, make a conscious decision as to whether or not to employ the instruction they've just been given. And that surprised me, because that's quite an active decision, and it's quite an independent one, but that's what some of them said. Some of them said, I don't do it because I can't do it. That's not who I am. That's not what I have in front of me. That's not part of my toolbox. So all this instruction you're hearing from the sideline, already we have 3 reasons why they're not paying any attention. So I think certainly in my practice, and I would argue in your practice, you perhaps maybe need to consider that. So when you're screaming and shouting at your player, what response are you looking for? Because I'd argue there's not necessarily a cause and effect relationship there. And a games-based approach promotes athletes as active learners. Okay? Any questions? I know you've been sat there a long time. No?
How did you conduct the interviews with players at the regional development tournament?
So they were focus groups, they were interactive, and they were, what's the word that I wanted? They were promoted through recall. So during the focus group, I would play clips of the coach providing instruction from the game they just left. So it was straight after the game, they went into the interview room, I played some of the tape, then I asked them questions around what their responses were. Okay, concept of empowerment. I think I've already touched on it a little bit. All right, it's the shifting of power. Okay, so in Raven's typology of power, he gives us 4 versions, 4 labels. Okay, and the one we're interested in is legitimate. And I would argue that traditionally and historically, the coach's position is the person with legitimate power. That's the person that knows all the strategy, knows how to coach, what to coach. The players turn up, and the coach tries to fill those empty vessels. Okay, and as I've said earlier, we've got to move away from that. So empowerment is about shifting that decision making, allowing the athletes a voice. Okay? I'll let you read that for a second. I'm not going to bore you with all of that. Does anybody disagree with the concept of empowerment? I'm smiling because I'm thinking of a conversation about the Yugo way. Okay. So, I would argue that if we empower our athletes, we make them game aware, which I think is what you're all trying to get to. Okay? I would argue that through empowerment, we are creating connections. Bear in mind that invasion sports are interactive activities. So we want connections. We want problem solving. We want dialogue. Okay? We are creating shared meaning, which equates to shared learning. We are, or should I say, the players are taking action. And I think that's important. Yes?
I think it comes down to also coaches that run courses need to have the same way of thinking. Like, I can only speak with regard to what I do in Hearts, and I'm very, very lucky that we have a young man down there who gives the players a voice, and it's really strange to see the first couple of sessions the players are looking around saying, well, can we say something? And you see that in games, you know, since working with him, you know, when I go back to when I was on court with players, you know, the younger players are constantly, the coach has told us what to do, now what do we do? Whereas now it's giving that player the opportunity to think for themselves, but to have a voice, and it makes such a big difference.
And what I will say is it doesn't happen overnight.
No.
You know, it's a bit like what Stuart alluded to earlier. It's almost a culture shift. Again, I keep using Alan, I hope he doesn't mind. In his podcast, he refers to his American, and he challenged him to have a voice, and the American said, Coach, it's difficult for me. I'm used to being told what to do. I spoke to one of the regional talent managers last night about the culture of the sport, and we was talking about we coach an American sport. And if you watch the American version of our game, that's what you see. You see coaches telling. Okay, now I know we're only seeing, you know, we're seeing the game and we're seeing what we see in the media, and we don't know what goes on in practice, but it gives you some indication of that cultural shift that needs to happen. Finally.
Sam, don't you think the people that do run courses should be educated with the new way of thinking?
Yeah, and I think part of what we're doing today is trying to get a message out, and there's so many messages. I mean, I forget, I don't know how long the PDF is, but there's a lot of messages in there, and it's how do we get it out in a digestible way? You know, I'm an educator, and I'm pretty confident I've already lost 25% of my audience. They're tired, they're uncomfortable, they want to get up, they want to have a conversation, there's something they want to talk about. It's difficult to get messages out without either being an information dump or spending time that people don't have. But I would argue, Charlie will tell you better than me, we're trying to get there. I'm sure there's a whole suite of things that we will do over the next 12 months to bring the PDF to life, because it can't be a document on a shelf. I wouldn't expect it to be valuable or worthwhile if it sat on a shelf. Okay?
So I'm going to stop you again. We're up there all day. And you might want to talk about this, but this has to be embedded for me at the stage where we educate coaches at level 1 and level 2.
Yeah.
Because if you actually read the level 2 questions now, they're actually incorrect. They're so out of date. I don't know if we're going to talk about maybe how we move that on.
I think that's a CAG.
There's a technical, tactical focus on getting a level 2 coach. When does this stuff start coming at that level?
Yeah, I think, again, Brian will be able to tell you more than I will, but the coach advisory group is tasked with unpicking a lot of elements of coaching, one of which is the coach awards and the coach structure. But across all the sports, the level 1 and 2 are problematic, because it's what is the role of the level 1 and 2 award? What are you hoping to gain from it? So you go on your level 1 primarily because you won't be seen as a coach, you won't be deemed a coach unless you have that. But does it actually teach you anything? We all know that our experiences on the court, working alongside other coaches, is where we actually learn. So it's trying to get a blend, it's trying to get some key messages in there, and it's a difficult task. But I totally agree with you. Okay. How long have I got, Charlie? I've lost 5 minutes. Have I been talking that long? I do apologise. Okay, all right, I'll move through this quickly then. So, questioning. Why should we? I'm going to call those question starters and the debate of ideas. These two are two models, so I might not get to those, okay, but I will send something to Charlie that he can send out to you. That's a real life example from this season from a coach in our player pathway. Okay, they'd gone down the offensive end, missed, quick transition to the opposite end, the opposition scored and were fouled. Players typically at that moment stand around, and in that moment the coach shouted over, what should you be doing in our transition? Now, we could talk about the quality of that question. I don't think it's bad. So the question starter element is, what should you? So it's individualized, it's giving them an opportunity to think. Nothing wrong with that. But then, without any time in between, we ask the question again. So now we're applying pressure. And then again, no time elapses and we get the answer. What's wrong with it? They're all from the coach. Now I'm confident none of you do that. I'm confident you ask a question and you wait for a response. But my issue with that is there's no learning. There's no shared meaning being developed. That's just an instruction. That's not a question because the athlete hasn't contributed to it. So I'm going to argue that we should be asking questions for those reasons. We want to promote dialogue. We know that we need interaction and it will better our relationship with our athletes. It develops confidence and autonomy. But as Franklin said, and again, you know, I'm preaching to the converted. You all know this, okay? But in the moment, be it in practice or competition, it's difficult to retain that sort of thinking. Okay, again, other reasons why, I won't go into those. I'm now rushing. These are question starters. Okay? There's different models, different frameworks. I would argue that we should all be, in our planning, that should be included. So we should have a set of questions that we're going to ask. Okay? So think of, I don't know, whatever it is you're going to do this Sunday. All right, you've read AP6 session plan. Have you developed a set of questions? And if you don't know what to ask, they're your question starters. And in the session plan, there are multiple opportunities to extract information that you could use to formulate your questions. So in the exertion colours, a question could simply be, did you? No, it can't be did you. But if it was did you, you'd get a yes, no. But if it was, how would you explain your effort level in that moment, in that phase of activity? How rich a question is that? Okay, so that's what I want you to think about. So they're question starters. Nearly there, Charlie. And then there's this. Okay, this is from a French educationalist. All right, it's called The Debate of Ideas, and it's a framework. Okay, again, I won't go through any of that, but this is the framework. So you've now got a structured set of questions. Okay, so you ask those 4 questions in what they call a tactical timeout. Not in the same way that we refer to a timeout. So it's just a space where your athletes consider those. And I'm sure, again, a lot of you do that. All right? So, to finish, I was hoping to get to the session plan and to try to pull out how we try to encourage and promote this way of doing it. Okay? Yeah? Okay. I've been granted more time, if only.
It means Charlie's not asleep, which is really good.
Yeah, okay. Right, so I'll slow down a little bit then. So that's our framework, okay? It's a popular picture, that, isn't it? Yeah. I'm going to get you to sign that later, Vanessa, if that's all right. Okay, so I'm sure you've all seen this. The colours down the side are supposed to represent the rate of exertion. All right, and I think in those moments you can ask about the individual's rate of exertion. How would they explain what they were doing in that moment? So there's one opportunity for you. Within the progression points, as opposed to giving them, you could perhaps ask, where would you take our practice now? Giving up some of your practice, I don't know if anybody listens to Chris Oliver. Is it Chris Oliver, the podcast? It is Chris Oliver, isn't it? He had a guest on a couple of weeks ago, and he talked about giving up some of his practice, allowing the athletes to shape where we go. I quite like the whole idea of a athlete-driven start to practice. So we'll go in and I say, okay, what would you like to do today? Now I accept that you want to try and shape and facilitate that towards some sort of meaningful aim. But again, it's a very powerful tool at empowering. Okay? The teaching points. So you'll notice we've got players should and coaches should. And again, I think there's lots of rich questions in there. So spend some time reading through, using your question starters and put them into your planning. When we did the session plans, originally we discussed whether or not they were valuable. Whether or not you as a coach was going to pick that up and own it, because that's what it's about. If there's no investment in that, then that might as well be the back of a cereal packet. So again, going back to the prescriptive and descriptive type of model that we are purporting to have created, I'm asking you to own that. You might rip that to pieces. You might take bits out of it, put bits in. And some of the feedback I've gotten suggests that that's what you're doing, and that's what you're supposed to be doing. Okay? So you want to own it, and part of that ownership is about creating those questions. Yeah, again, so that's what the players should be doing. In the coaching teaching points, again, there are rich questions in there. So for example, it says promote effort under control. So is that an instruction? Is it more meaningful if you give it as an instruction? Or can we create a question that enables some thinking through autonomy and develops confidence? Because that's actually what we want on the court. Okay, so again, I'm going to argue that questioning will do a lot of what you want it to do if you invest in it.
With questioning and player-led practice, am I right in thinking it takes more time than a kind of dictatorial style of coaching?
Of course it does.
So we have 3 to 5 minutes for that first drill to get across the coaching points on the right so that they're technically ready for Ian and the national team guys, but also that they've been empowered enough to where I can have a dialogue with the players in 3 to 5 minutes.
So
I'm completely on board with all of the principles and everything. I just think time-wise and empowering a player in 3 hours every month is close to impossible.
It is difficult. I'm not suggesting it's not. First thing I'm going to say is I love your use of language. It means you actually listened. I'm joking. We were talking about language last night. What I would say is that A, it's about planning. And if any of you have read any of the literature on effective coaching, planning is central. The better planners are the better coaches. So that's the first thing. Okay, so you've got to plan those questions in. All right. I'm not suggesting that in the short time that you have them, you are going to bombard them with questions, because that's not appropriate. That's not going to create any sort of meaningful learning. So it's about being, I guess, smart with your questioning. It's about trying to relate your questioning to your aims and objectives for the session. It's about finding moments, and I call them questioning episodes, that are going to get the most out of the athlete. So it might be that you ask 2 or 3 questions in an entire session. If they're the right questions, if you've given them time to respond, time to maybe construct a response as a group, then that might do it. You know, I don't know. I don't know the contexts that each of you are working in. Yes, you could argue it's all the Aspire program, but they're all different. So I accept that questioning in terms of all of that is difficult. I think Mac last night was talking about it's a long-term process. So we don't have that on the Aspire program. You're not with them every day. It is difficult. But I think if we start to work towards it, we put it into our clubs, then we'll get the payback in 2, 3, 4 years' time. I don't know if that answers the question. Was it there and then there? Did you put your hand up? I know you did.
My question is, I'm not fully understanding the Aspire program. You know, how many of the coaches are videoing their sessions, you know, on this monthly basis, and then potentially breaking those sessions down, and then when they are coming back in, actually before they actually get to the court, there's a session in a classroom base where there's a question and answering process.
Yeah, I think
I'm just trying to help the coach out with a time base.
Yeah, I think you're looking at maybe the aspirations or some of the aspirational elements of the program. It's at the minute it's about contact. It's about trying to get in what we can in a short space of time. They only have them for 8 hours in a day.
3 hours.
Yeah. So it's difficult. It is very difficult. I think maybe in the evaluation at the end of the first cycle, we can look at all of that sort of stuff. Yeah.
In teaching, there's a concept known as fit. So what you could actually do prior to the session, you could actually deliver, using the coordinators of the program, information to the players so that they prepare ahead of the actual session. So you could actually fire those questions ahead of the actual session, and then once they hear it from you, they're already used to it. So you get a better response. So that's another strategy.
And that information could actually be a diluted version of the session plan. Yeah, absolutely. Yes, sir.
I'm just going to add, in terms of coaches investing in technical, tactical, coaches investing in the skill of, social competence, social awareness, figuring out, investing in themselves how to ask questions, but to maybe add a possible solution is sometimes what you don't want to do is turn questioning into a guessing game.
No.
So as a coach, can you guys guess what I'm thinking? Because you could be there as a coach for bloody hours, and you're going to get loads of buzzwords thrown at you that the young athletes think that they should be saying. So sometimes to speed it up, really, you can even, sometimes there's nothing wrong with actually telling them, I'm looking for this. So give them the solution so that you can get all the guessing game out there, but then ask them the context of where would that solution sit within this particular environment. So then you can actually drill to it straight away, and it's still open, but actually give them the context of what you're looking for, but don't tell them where or where not you've seen it or you haven't seen it. So then it doesn't turn into a guessing game.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right, and I would argue that actually in your planning you have your questions and you have your answers and you have the journey to get to them. Okay, and then depending on the sorts of responses you're getting, and it's all scenario based, so you've got to set it up, you've got to set the context of the activity up, the question, go through the activity, will it get them to the answer? That's what we're sort of looking for. Okay, last bit, nearly done. Oh, that was the last bit.
Can I just say one thing? There's a lot of really good practice here. Could Charlie or you find an Aspire session where questioning is, they've done a lot of it, and maybe film some good practice, just 3-4 minutes, and share it with the others?
Yes, absolutely. If anybody does it and does it well, we can have that conversation.
If we just hold that until Brian's just done his little.
Okay.
He's going to talk about, because that's going to become
Of course, yeah. Okay, so to finish then, my key message is plan your learning. Okay, so don't plan your session, don't plan what you want to do, plan the learning. Okay, include the questioning, include the answers, look for the moments or the questioning episodes that will get the most out of your session. Prepare your question starters. Consider how you will manage the questioning. So great question here about time, how will you manage it? All right. I'm pretty sure in the early 80s that was actually a strapline for a sports development project, Let Them Play. Okay, so it's a relatively universal concept, but that's what we want. And I understand time is an issue, but let's have them playing. Provide the time and space for questioning, for learning, and for creating shared meaning. All right, it's not about an empty vessel. It's not about what you give to them. Review your practice, and I guess that's what Tony was talking about. And hopefully through the systems that Brian's going to talk about later, we might be able to start to do that and promote thinking and interaction. Thank you very much. I know you've sat for a long time. I do appreciate it, and I also appreciate that you're all doing a very good job. So thank you very much.
Yeah, as long as it just, because it just lines up.
I was
Okay, literally just stop 5 minutes. No more. What I will do is, when we have the lunch break, I'll bring my laptop up and we'll set the system up so you can come and have a little play with the system. But what you should, I told them 1 o'clock this afternoon. If it doesn't come 1 o'clock this afternoon, I'm going to be making a phone call. You will all receive an invite to our Aspire Learning platform. So we've engaged a company called Hive Learning, and they are basically what we will provide is a resource and coaches, in essence, a coaches space. So you will have access to a privileged access, so it's only for you as an Aspire coach, to our learning resources. So we'll have the session plans, we'll have the presentations from today, we'll have the PDF resources, We'll have the moments of the game. We'll have all the elements of the offense, defense, transition defense. They'll all be there for you to access on multi-level. So, as in, you'll be able to do it online and offline. It's not just on your laptop. It's on your phone. It's on everything other than a Windows phone, because Windows phones don't exist anymore. So iOS or Android, and that will be for you. So today's presentations, they're all going to be shared on the platform. Okay, and it's literally you sign in, you go into there. That's one element of it, and that's the functioning element of it. The real power in the system is that all the discussion points we just came about there today, videoing the session of videoing the 2 or 3 minutes of you or one of your coaches doing some really good Q&A elements and teasing out the empowerment within the Aspire session. Is you can clip that and you can post it. You can post that to your coaches. You can share that across the network. We can have a little conversation about that. How did this work for you? I find this really helpful. And so we'll be engaging a platform for you to engage with other like-minded coaches around things that matter. And we'll be able to disseminate that information to you a lot more quicker than we can at the moment. So the intention will be come back off the summer programs. One of the things we've always talked about. Guys get a lot of experience. Guys get a lot of understanding. What's the current trends in the game? How do we get that back to those that need it on the coal face? Well, the Hive's the platform to be able to do that. Okay. I'm going to make sure it's this afternoon. It's not this afternoon. The first thing in the morning, you'll get an invitation to the Hive platform. Whilst we're having lunch, which is next door, isn't it?
Yep.
I'll have the laptop in here so we can have a look and play for those that are not aware of the system. But it's very intuitive, very easy to use, very accessible system.
Is this just for the Aspire coaches? Right?
Initially, it's for the Aspire coaches. It's actually for all of it will be rolled out across all our workforce. So so some of the officials who are using have already got their little platform going. For the National League officials, will have a similar rollout. So one of the programs Stuart talked about this morning, the Slam Jam, that'll have its own little community of practice on there as well. And as coaches, we all wear different hats, don't we? We've got National League doing, we're Aspire here today, but we've got local clubs. We're doing a recreational session on a Saturday morning. You'll have access to those particular platforms as well.
Good. Yeah, the way the Hive system is going to enable us to get applications is going to completely transform and revolutionise our practice. What's really good about this system as well is we'll know if you're engaging with it or not as well. So we'll be prodding you every now and again to make sure that you do get onto the system. We're going to take a break now. So the lounge is where the coffees and the teas are. If I can ask everybody to be back in the room by 11:35, so you've got 11 minutes. Grab a coffee and have a little bit of a chat. Thank you very much.
Precise.
What was that? Thank you very much, sir.
Your presentation. Yeah. Marcus, sorry.
We learned a lot of what you should do during that time. Skilled warriors.
Well, that's what I mean. So I was going to say I could pop by tomorrow.
You drop
So that's where I would start.
Police officers go off.
What is there and standing up. It's about still setting the records a little bit longer than the last one. What you're doing is you're the gold standard teaching the coaches to you to but when you rely on you're practical. Very quality sports. What a content to extract out of that.
Good feeling around that one because some of the shit really well check this out. So Billy's asking the right, that's very important before you throw questions. And I turn that back on myself, how many of them want the that's good to see. So it's a picture of perspective yourself, you're taking yourself out.
I think, so I think it's not allow it to happen on the is that alright?
That's fine, that's fine. It's been a true bit of time.
The relief there, Charlie, was that Sam said before, distance what we were saying, he wasn't like that moment off. We're going to say something completely different what we do.
Thinking about things like that.
Not play, yeah, exactly, play it like we planned it. Originally, I designed it, right. I've got a
Do you need Sam?
I don't think so, not really, no. I think we'll make it up. Well, Adams was brought Birmingham on an independent coaching consultant, so you can.
I've got it.
You've got the VGI. Yeah, and obviously I'm working with. Currently always engaged by Sport Birmingham's work. Is that the right way? So, Adam, is that? What was that? Sorry. It's, Charlie was saying, how do you want to be introduced? Yeah. And I was saying, well, I don't actually work with Sport Birmingham, but I'm engaged by Sport Birmingham.
It's training in consultant.
Yeah. That's going to start.
Right, and my point of view,
well, Mark's be talking more, so that's what we got. Mark.
Okay.
What is like a mark that we're using what I'll be around the situation really, what is the mean to be a British basketball coach, and linking with anything that your knowledge of people need to choose a sample of coaches. I think an ace coach is probably and looking at what is more the social emotional side of things rather than technical side of things. Are we unique to what we do, or do we? Yes, the Luke works. Our comrade Stanford area. So I worked with him on Pro New Sport today for a while.
Certainly from the coach, that's what I mean. Again, one of the questions we always ask is, why are you here? What's your role? What's my role?
Done together.
Certainly with the
Unfortunately not, no. He did say he really wanted to
There's probably one out from the
yeah, I
next
didn't
year.
know.
Pick up the phone, let's go.
Yeah, okay, yeah.
And then we can go through the machinations.
You got terms of reference for the project already? Yeah, kind of. Yeah, but I'm open. I've got this 4th of March here. Yeah, right. So we can. I'm looking at are we unique or are we universal? Do we just follow what everyone else? Because Sam said about. Are we? I was asked basically. Because I was like teaching around sport in the UK, and I was like,
yeah, so I'll introduce us.
yeah. I was like, I just do it.
I think it's taking
It's quite freaking understand.
Yeah, so
we're about to embark on a massive change process, isn't it? So it's the start you build that. You're not